All right, let's set the scene here. The year is 1965. You've got this guy, Joe Colomb. He's sitting in his office, armed with a fresh Stanford MBA, and he suddenly receives what is quite possibly the absolute worst phone call of his professional life. I mean, we're talking about a call that threatened to completely wipe out his entire business. Today, in this explainer, we're going to look at exactly how he handled that make-or-break moment, and in the process, we'll unpack the incredible power of ruthless curation.
So, at the time of that fateful phone call, Joe's whole livelihood basically came down to just one number: 6. That was it. He was running this tiny, honestly pretty unremarkable chain of exactly 6 convenience stores out in the LA area called Pronto Markets. They sold exactly what every other corner store was selling back then. Soda, cigarettes, basic magazines. Just 6 small stores keeping his head above water.
And the news on that phone call? Southland Corporation, the massive parent company of 7-Eleven, was officially bringing its massive franchise empire right to California. The contrast here was just stark. It was Joe's 6 totally generic stores going up against 7-Eleven's absolute Goliath of a national empire. They had massive marketing budgets, untouchable supplier deals, the whole shebang. It was the ultimate existential threat. If Joe tried to fight them directly, he'd be wiped off the map in 3 years tops.
Okay, so that brings us to Section 1, finding a hidden trend and prioritizing data over instinct.
Now, what Joe did next goes against pretty much every traditional business textbook out there. Instead of launching a desperate race-to-the-bottom price war, he retreated to his desk and just started obsessively reading. And he managed to dig 3 completely obscure demographic trends right out of the raw data. First, the Boeing 747 was launching, which was making air travel drastically cheaper and opening up international trips to normal people. Second, the GI Bill had quietly created the most college-educated population in American history. And third, because of those first 2 factors, there was suddenly this massive demand for foreign tastes. People were coming back from Europe craving good wine and imported cheese, things that local convenience stores simply didn't stock.
And this is where it gets really brilliant. Joe actually coined a term for this highly specific group. He called them the overeducated and underpaid. We're talking about your graduate students, teachers, museum curators, junior professors. These folks had incredibly sophisticated tastes, but very small budgets. Joe realized that this entire demographic was just being totally ignored by mainstream supermarkets, and that was his eureka moment. He decided to just walk away, completely abandon 7-Eleven's mass-market customer base, and build something totally new.
Moving into Section 2. The 3 golden rules, and the actual Trader Joe's strategy.
Fast forward a bit to 1967. Joe opens the very first Trader Joe's in Pasadena. It was deliberately weird, tiki themes, Hawaiian shirts, but beneath all that costume, he was operating with absolute surgical precision, driven by 3 counterintuitive rules. Rule number 1, ruthless curation. To put this into perspective, a standard supermarket crams in around 50,000 different items. Trader Joe's, they decided to carry just 4,000. That's less than 10% of a normal grocery store. Joe figured out something that a lot of retailers still struggle with today. Throwing massive amounts of choice at people doesn't actually make them happier, it paralyzes them. By drastically limiting choices, he cured customer paralysis and managed to turn this boring chore of grocery shopping into a genuinely exciting treasure hunt.
Rule number 2 is all about the supply chain. Joe's strategy was to completely eliminate the middleman. I mean, they would literally fly straight to foreign farms, small dairies in Wisconsin, spice farms in India. They'd buy in massive volume, cut out the distributors entirely, and just slap their own private label right on the products. This is exactly how they can sell you a premium European-made cookie butter for just $4, because it's often made in the exact same factories as those luxury European brands, just repackaged for Trader Joe's.
And then we hit Rule 3, $50,000. Back in the 1970s, when your standard grocery clerks were scraping by on minimum wage, Joe was paying his crew the modern equivalent of $50,000 a year. We're talking premium salaries for retail work, complete with real benefits and profit sharing.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would he do that? Well, Joe had an incredibly blunt, fantastic way of explaining it. He'd say, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. He firmly believed that having a super happy, well-compensated employee enthusiastically handing you a sample of frozen orange chicken, that was infinitely more valuable than any traditional advertising campaign. Premium labor wasn't an expense for him, it was literally his best marketing strategy.
All right, let's jump into Section 3, building a Category 1, profits over size.
Just look at how this played out. By the late 70s, this weird tiki-themed store catering to underpaid academics had quietly become the single most profitable grocery chain in California. Notice I said most profitable, not the biggest. It started with those failing Pronto markets in '58, pivoted to Trader Joe's in '67, but the real plot twist happened in 1979. The German billionaire behind Aldi actually acquired the company. But instead of tearing it apart or making it hyper-corporate, Theo Albrecht let Joe keep running his exact playbook completely untouched. Joe finally retired in '88 with 26 stores, and today, the company brings in over $16 billion in annual revenue.
And what's really fascinating about their modern success is their totally anti-marketing approach. Think about it. They have no sales, no loyalty programs, no mobile app, and they barely even advertise. Because Trader Joe's built an absolute fortress around their specific niche, they can just completely ignore all those modern retail gimmicks. They don't need digital algorithms or digital coupons. They rely entirely on the massive fan evangelism created by serving their small group exceptionally well.
Which brings us to Section 4, the playbook for founders, and 3 vital lessons we can take away from all this. Because whether you're building a business or just trying to stand out in your own career, Joe's story isn't really about groceries. It's about strategy. Lesson 1, change the game entirely. Make your competitor irrelevant to your specific customers. When a giant like 7-Eleven enters your space, the natural instinct is to try and fight them on their own terms. Lower prices, faster service. But that is a losing battle. The true strategy is walking away and creating your own game, where the giant's strengths simply don't matter to your audience.
Lesson 2, constraints are actually a gift. Let limitations force your creativity. Joe lacked the budget to stock 50,000 items, and he didn't have the cash for massive national ad buys. But those limitations forced him to curate ruthlessly and rely on his well-paid employees as his primary marketing. Those constraints forced the creativity that ultimately became their iconic signature brand.
And Lesson 3, be a reading genius. Consume the obscured information that everyone else just ignores. We so often think of great founders as these visionary geniuses, pulling magical ideas from thin air. But Joe's entire $16 billion strategy was hiding in plain sight, buried in boring trade journals and airline data. The opportunity was always there. He just looked harder at the data than anyone else was willing to.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider Joe's final thoughts on his legacy. When he passed away in 2020, people kept calling him a retail visionary, but he actually disagreed. He said his success simply came down to thinking about who you're not trying to serve. He believed intentional exclusion was his true secret weapon. Knowing exactly who you are not for is sometimes far, far more powerful than knowing who you are for.
So I'm going to leave you with this one provocative question. Who are you not trying to serve? Let that sink in for a second. Because this exact same playbook, deliberately ignoring 95% of the market, is what built other massive empires today. Think about Yeti Coolers, right? A company that built a massive, massive brand by deliberately ignoring the mass market. Focus your energy, curate your world, and don't be afraid to leave the rest behind. Thanks for exploring this with me today. Use these lessons, use this playbook, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.